Hello everyone and welcome. This piece is called The Consequences.
It's the latest event from our project Charting the Mayflower, and it's about the impact of ventures like the Mayflower on others.
The continuing impact.
It's our contribution to Thanksgiving.
Or the day of mourning.
The consequences.
These are things we weren't taught at school.
What were we taught?
I was taught that King Harold was killed with an arrow through his eye, except he probably wasn't.
I was taught that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
I was taught that in the French Revolution, when there was no bread, Marie Antoinette said, well, let them eat cake.
The Romans wore togas and ate nettle soup.
Queen Anne had 17 children, but none of them survived past infancy.
Henry VIII had 6 wives. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived.
In the French Revolution, an important agreement was made on a tennis court. It was called the Tennis Court Oath.
They used to take canaries down mines.
The statue storm in 1566, when Calvinist Protestant crowds destroyed religious...
Okay, thanks Yvonne. Thanks, Yvonne. What about colonialism? After the deals, the measurings and the arrivals came the consequences.
Through turning over the story of the Mayflower and looking beyond the European historians, we've found out a few things and we'd like to share them with you.
If you have any comments, please put them in the chat. If you have a question, please put that in the Q&A and we'll look at those at the end.
In about 15 minutes?
Okay, everyone, here we go.
Wampanoag, the name means people of the first light, and their ancestors had lived in the area where the Mayflower landed for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
In 1600, there were about 12,000 Wampanoag.
The people had a cyclical relationship to the land.
They shared land and crops, creatures of the land and sea.
Their ceremonies honoured the world around them.
Then the plague came, the Great Dying, between 1610 and 1619, a pandemic brought by European fishermen and raiders.
The Wampanoag thought it might have been unleashed by the god of the Europeans.
Possibly shot from their thundersticks.
After the Great Dying, just 3,000 of the 12,000 Wampanoag were left.
It was then, in 1620, that the Mayflower arrived.
On one side of the scales sat leaves, shells, acorns, and fruit.
On the other side, the English loaded books, tools, and rifles.
When the Mayflower landed, the settlers relied on the local Wampanoag people, who helped them. They agreed to support each other.
A contract was signed.
Over the years, as more and more people arrived from England, they brought weapons,
Animals,
imposed their religion. They said they had the authority of the word of God and the king to do this.
There hath in God's visitation reigned a wonderful plague, so that there is not left any that do claim or challenge any kind of interest therein.
More English settlers arrived.
By the mid-1630s, there were about 400 settlers living in Plymouth.
By 1640, 20,000 had arrived. The contract was torn up.
And these Europeans regarded the land differently, as a possession, not as something that was part of them. They took resources. This is what Europe, a small place with little natural resources, needed. Then it was beaver skins and timber. Today, it is gas and oil.
And as the Christians spread, their confidence that this was written spread with it. The idea of white supremacy or manifest destiny has its dangerous seed in this time.
The cyclical relationship to the land, the seasonal movement of people up rivers from seas to forests. This was replaced, first by praying towns, Christianized settlements, and in later centuries by reservations.
The land of the Cape Cod Wampanoag was 300 square miles. Today, they have 23 square miles.
Now, I have been interested by the names of American cities and areas, and I was looking at what they were originally called and seeing how closely those names resemble what they're called now, or not, as the case may be. So, I'm going to start with the names that you would recognise now. Now, the first one is Philadelphia, and that was originally called Coaquanock, and it means grove of tall pines. Santa Fe was originally called Ogapoji, and that means white, slow water place. Rhode Island was called Pancassid, and it means little cleared space.
Speaking of consequences, something I learned recently is that Harvard University, one of America's most celebrated universities, was the...
Andrew, we haven't finished the names yet. Chicago was originally called Chicago, and that means wild onions. New York was called Mannahatta, and that means island of the hills.
Harvard was part of the drive by European settlers to educate and convert native students.
It was established just 16 years after the Mayflower's arrival. The funds were raised in England to build what was called an Indian college.
Yes, a place where native students could be educated to become Christian ministers.
So, following the English guns and the English cattle came the gospel, the ideological underpinning.
Seattle was called Seattle, and it was named after Chief Seattle.
Anyone heard of manifest destiny?
I have.
It's a term coined much later by a newspaper editor, John O'Sullivan. Manifest destiny included a belief in the inherent superiority of Anglo-Saxon white Americans. It goes with the conviction that they were destined by God to conquer the lands from sea to shining sea.
Caleb Shishatemuk, the son of a Wampanoag sachem or chief from Martha's Vineyard, was the only native to graduate from Harvard.
What was Boston called, Dottie?
Well, Boston was called Sharmut, and that means living waters.
Sadly, Caleb died of consumption soon after graduating, aged just 20.
Malibu was called Maliwoo, and it means it makes a loud noise all the time over there. And I think it refers to the ocean.
For proponents of manifest destiny, the American Indians were blocks to the forward march of racial and technological progress.
Now, Michigan was called Cargo-Ash-Karnik, and it means large water or large lake.
Joel died in a shipwreck just before he could officially graduate and receive a diploma.
Tucson in Arizona was called Cookson, and it means black base. New Orleans was called Malbanchia, a place for foreign languages. I found the name things quite interesting.
The ideology of manifest destiny justified extreme measures. In the late 1700s, the US government appropriated land in the Mississippi River Valley from Native Americans and resold it cheaply to white people who built plantations to grow cotton, which was picked by enslaved Black people. The enslaved workforce in America is where the country's wealth resided. Manifest destiny justified clearing the native population from the land through forced removal and violent extermination. I found that quite interesting.
Yes, yes. Yvonne, do you want to tell us about Wampum?
Yes, well, the wampum belt represented for the Wampanoag communal narratives, ceremonies, and commitments. And so the images on it can be considered as a form of indigenous writing.
These and images drawn on birch bark scrolls are the closest thing to Wampanoag written history.
When a people, a nation, are subjected to oppression, their agency and lands taken from them, communities as a whole experience social trauma. They suffer a blow to the basic tissues of social life. It damages the bonds attaching people together and impairs their sense of community.
After the arrival of the Mayflower, the Wampanoag chief Usamequin, or Massasoit, kept friendly relationships with the settlers for decades until his death.
But many Wampanoag disagreed with their leader. All they saw was the loss of their land, their culture.
When he died, his son Metacom, or King Philip, united many of the Wampanoag and others in resisting the colonists.
The resulting war was named King Philip's War.
By the English.
Thousands of natives were killed.
As well as King Philip.
Or Metacom.
This precious wampum belt was seized and sent as a war trophy with the war report to King James in England. However, it never arrived there and has remained missing ever since.
To bring this up to the 20th century, can I tell you a tale of James, the King of England, and of another James, Frank James, also known as Wamsutta. One signed a patent in the early 1600s. The other had his speech suppressed in 1970, the 350th anniversary of the Mayflower. Guess which one said this? There hath in God's visitation reigned a wonderful plague, so that there is not left any that do claim or challenge any kind of interest therein. And which James wasn't allowed to say this?
Even before pilgrims landed, it was common practice for explorers to capture Indians.
We in our judgment are persuaded and satisfied that the appointed time is come.
To capture Indians, take them to Europe.
In which Almighty God hath thought fit and determined.
And sell them as slaves.
That these large and goodly territories
for 220 shillings apiece
should be possessed and enjoyed by such of our subjects.
Frank Wamsutta James said in 1970,
you, the white man, are celebrating an anniversary. We, the Wampanoag, will help you celebrate in the concept of beginning. It was a beginning of a new life for pilgrims. Now, 350 years later, it is a determination of a new beginning for the original American, the American Indian. We are determined, and our presence here this evening is living testimony that this is only the beginning for the American Indian, particularly the Wampanoag, to regain the position in this country that is rightfully ours.
The Native American nations lost their lands, the roots, the hunting grounds, their lives, their families, their homes, their...
And what happens when you have no power and no choice? Trauma, addiction, depression. The society unravels.
They lost their beliefs and rituals, their languages, their customs.
It wasn't until 2011 that another member of the Akana Wampanoag community graduated from Harvard. Tiffany Smalley completed a degree in government studies, and at her graduation, Harvard presented members of the Wampanoag community with a posthumous degree for Joel Iacums, almost 350 years since he had been due to graduate.
The contemporary Wampanoag are making the world aware of their perspective of their history by creating a traditional wampum belt and exhibiting it in America and England.
In 1970, Frank James and the newly formed American Indian Movement held a protest in New Plymouth. They disrupted the 350th anniversary of the Mayflower. One of their actions was to board the replica of the ship that had been built and to take a mannequin of Captain Christopher Jones and throw him over the side. The man from Rotherhithe was dunked in the drink unceremoniously.
These are the consequences. This is the legacy.
The melody you can hear is the New World Symphony by Dvorak. For the Europeans, America was a new world. Except it wasn't new, it was ancient. Human history in the Americas goes back 15,000 years. The history of the Wampanoag does not start with English contact. That is a Eurocentric concept, as though the Wampanoag only came into existence when we first saw them. Their civilization was ancient, rich, and complex. Why don't we study that at school?
The country, so the Spanish, and when they came and how many there were. However, the premise for the project was the Mayflower. It was our starting point. And we've tried to stay loyal to that premise. Otherwise, we become a sort of American history group. Whereas in fact, our interest was in why did America really pick this as their founding myth, if you like, or their founding story? There were, you're right, people there before from other nations and ones who went there afterwards. But for some reason, this story has fired the imagination. So it's that story we decided to explore.
Anybody else? I think we should hear from Yvonne, because come on, Yvonne, the Dutch are mentioned here. What's
Yeah, did we mention already that we started the whole project because it was this year exactly 400 years ago that the Mayflower sailed to America. So they wanted to celebrate that. And then we, as Dorothy told, looked further into it. But the group of separatists, they were not safe in England because they were pursued because of their faith. And they, at first they went to the Netherlands because in the Netherlands there were for ages more tolerant attitudes toward having different religions.
I'd just like to add that obviously it's not only the sort of the as you put it, ravaging, David, of those areas. It's also the trading relationships and how the different countries traded in different ways. I don't want to exonerate the English in any way, but the Mayflower passengers did not want to trade firearms, for example, whereas I'm afraid to say, Yvonne, the Dutch did. The Dutch traded firearms and gunpowder. Let's go on to a second question. We've got 7 now. Somebody says this has been the most impressive and flawless uses of Zoom I've witnessed. Could we speak a little bit more about your experiences in making theatre using this medium? Come on, somebody Jane, have a go at that, would you? If you unmute yourself, somebody have a go at that. Using theatre.
Well, I mean, having to film myself is like my worst nightmare ever. So it's been quite interesting having to sort of do it, and I think Beth's cut some good bits, but some people have just been so fantastic at what they've done and innovative and creative, and it's you know, I've actually really enjoyed doing it, even though it is my worst nightmare.
At the beginning, when right at the beginning of COVID, it felt to me that this was a really important meeting place for all of us, and using our phones to make stuff and learning to cut, it's that really felt like a little candle in the darkness at that point for me. Anybody else want to talk about theatre in this medium?
Yeah, I'll say something.
Go on,
well, I think one thing that's happened is that the group has remained extremely focused and loyal. You know, often we would miss sessions when we had to turn up in person, but actually we've turned up.
Yeah.
And it's been consistent, and it has been easier in that way. And the limitations have provided a creative challenge to us. I think there is one problem, is that there's a delay on Zoom, which you will mostly all know about. And so the idea of picking up cues is quite difficult, because you might be picking them up, but it doesn't register in time. And so it registers sometimes as a delay, and there's an unevenness about the recording levels, which again, but I think that people just they compensate for it now. I hope they do anyway.
We've also mucked around with all sorts of, we've been doing, you know, games and exercises, occasional games and exercises. We've also done scripts, we've done character, we've even brought costume and stuff like that. And we've had a gas. So I mean, I've been absolutely hysterical sometimes. Lucy, talking.
Yeah, I think it's there's been something really joyful about only having the resources that are literally in your own home. If sometimes before a Thursday evening session, Beth would send us like a little bit of a challenge beforehand. So we might have been doing a bit of research over the week, and one week we all had to find something to dress our head or shoulders that represented what we've been researching, and you've just got the stuff around you, and it's just another way of using your creative energies, which has been really refreshing at a time when you everything else in the world's a bit chaotic.
Okay, I'm going to bang on now. Am I being asked, are there future plans for this project? Yes, we are reconvening after Christmas. We will be doing a concluding term of the charting of the Mayflower. Our ideal is to bring it all together in a live performance piece at Easter. Whether or not that will be allowed, whether or not we will be able to meet and rehearse live, I don't know yet. But I'm hoping we will be able to. And whatever we do, whether we're still confined to Zoom or we're in the great outdoors, anybody can join. Anybody can join. Please contact Bubble and let us know. Okay, we're being asked by somebody, lots of people, which passenger's story really resonated with you? Anybody want to come up with a resonating story?
I'll say something.
Go on, Anne.
So I descended from the Mayflower. Like I said in the video at the start, I'm an American, and we can trace our American family back to the English settlers. And so I was kind of interested in what my family history would have been like. John Tilley was someone I'm descended from, and his daughter Elizabeth Tilley. And there isn't much information about Elizabeth Tilley, but I wanted to know more about her, and so I just had to kind of make it up. There was a night when we wrote our own scripts, and I wrote a script from Elizabeth Tilley's perspective, and she actually was a very prolific in her descendants. She had 10 children, and all of her children had at least 5 children. So the Tilleys have a very long kind of descendancy, which I found interesting. And when we started talking about all of the kind of the horrible things, you know, some of the things we heard tonight, the kind of the, you know, genocide and and wiping the Native Americans off their land and digging up their graves and horrible things like that, I kind of tried to flip Elizabeth Tilley's perspective on her head and say, look at what we've left. Look at this. Because I thought, you know, she was a proud settler. She probably having had so many children, and she would have been sad with what settlers left behind. She would have been sad by Trump. She would have been sad by the kind of descent into the far right that we've seen, and so I kind of projected that onto her. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Anne. I'm going to bang on if you don't mind. I'm being asked from Bob from Mohammed, what nationality mostly made up the 40,000 settlers by 1640? I think, I'm not absolutely sure about this, but I'm pretty sure that if Rita's listening, she'll be the person to answer, and she could put the answer into chat for us. I think they would mainly be English. We're talking about 40,000 English. A lot came across at that point because of what was happening in England. A lot were Puritans, who were different to separatists, and a large number came from East Anglia, Lincolnshire, Suffolk and Norfolk. And then, does anybody on the panel have ancestors who were on the Mayflower? No, but I think Tracy,
probably just me.
Tracy, who just said she wants to join. I think she, if I'm not mistaken, if it's Tracy, I think it is related to Miles Standish, otherwise known as the Shrimp. Did anybody else say they wanted to? They were no. Okay, good. When did the phrase "manifest destiny" finally get discarded? Whoa, and again,
discarded.
Harriet.
I don't know if it was ever discarded. So, I mean, manifest destiny was the idea that came into effect basically when the Mexican-American War sort of ended, and the U.S. decided to buy the whole of the West, basically west of the Mississippi River, I think. It seems like that's been the kind of the U.S. perspective ever since. I mean, how many American military bases are there around the world? I mean, how much do we get involved in American global geopolitics? I don't think that manifest destiny has ever stopped, but I'm obviously a bit cynical.
Any more on that? Okay, and then I'm being asked other instances of Wampanoag history. Well, there is a couple of very good books have come out in the last 2 years. The most recent is David Silverman's "This Land is Their Land," which is excellent. And then also, I can't remember, the Common Pot, a book called The Common Pot, which is about how the Wampanoag histories are indelibly linked to the shapes and natures of the landscape and the ecology. There is an overlap that we don't necessarily understand. We can't get our head around the way in which they record history, how they see history, rather like Aboriginals. They see history in the land. And Andrew.
Just as the newest member to the group, so I've sort of stowed away this last couple of months. So my researching and learning has just been bits and pieces that we've been sharing over these recent weeks, and then putting it together for tonight. But even during those times, people have been sharing within the group links to articles and so on. My friends who I believe are watching now, Amy and Elisa, just shared with me something about the rediscovery of the Wampanoag language, which I haven't watched all the way through. It's a 1 hour long film, and it looks really fascinating and quite remarkable that the Wampanoag rediscovered their own language and recreated it within the last 50 years or less.
You must have
that's something I will share that. It's very good.
Andrew, you must have missed that week because Ava researched into, what's the lady's name, Ava?
I wish I would have it. It was Mary something and something.
Yes.
Go.
There we go. I'm still catching up, as you can see.
She started to piece the language back together.
Fantastic.
She started with place names,
Yes.
which suddenly sort of resonated with her, and very much her dreams helped her to make sense of them. And then she researched some manuscripts or deals which were in the English as well as in the Wampanoag language. And that's how
her whole work came from a dream, didn't it? She had a, what was the dream, Eva? She dreamt.
Well,
don't worry.
She dreamt something. No, that it wasn't a dream. There was some saying that the language will be reborn with the help of the ancestors of those who sort of destroyed it. And that made sense to her, and she actually accepted help from some, American professor of linguistics as well.
And we've had some information in the chat there as well.
Okay, good. I'm trying to follow Q&A as well as chat. It's all very difficult. And the Donatella, where are you? We need you back in the group. And yes, I think it is Manifest Destiny is linked to Protestant theory of salvation. And Ian's asking us as a comment, I think, more. Thankfully, this isn't just about colonialists. That's been the tendency in our history. The shift in focus house seems important in drawing attention to what was lost. Still like to know more about the conditions that led to the migration, the economics of the settlement, and whether they were slave owners. To start with, not the economics of the Mayflower specifically were basically to try and import furs and wood to start with, predominantly. It then became the New Plymouth and Boston and that area became the area that was feeding the West Indies, basically, and were implicated in the plantations there. Emma's asking, perhaps in these troubled times, as with so many, oh no, it's gone. Communities around the globe, the English had hope for positive futures. Can we hear more about the early Mayflower start, preparation and choice of crew? We don't know about the choice of crew. The boat Mayflower was part owned by the captain, Christopher Jones. The crew, we think, some of them came from Southwark and Rotherhithe, probably because that was the home port, that was where the ship was registered. But we don't have the names. We have the names of a few of them, but not many. Don't know, anybody got anything to add to that? No. Chip in if you have. Miranda Murphy, thank you for a wonderful. How do we settle on the subject of the Mayflower? And what impact do you think more education on the Mayflower's journey might have? And that's as far as it goes. Well, so we settle on the subject because Southwark wanted people to mark the 400th anniversary because of Rotherhithe's links to it, and our response was, we don't know this story, and we only won't know one side of this story. So let's do what we've done with other bubble projects previously, which is to research it. We've never researched something that's 400 years old. It's been interesting, but that's what we wanted to do. And then we've got, and what impact do you think more education on the Mayflower's journey might have been? Anybody want to have a go on that? If we learned more about this at school, Judith, what do you think? Judith is unmuting.
Sorry, I'm unmuting. Yeah, I mean, that's a conversation we had, and you probably noticed it was reflected in the script about what we learnt at school. And I think all of us, and certainly me big time, were very shocked about how I knew absolutely nothing about this. I had heard of the Mayflower, but I didn't really, and I just thought they founded America or something like that. And I had no idea about basically what happened once the settlers began to arrive in the USA. And I've been reading up on it even more since. So it's kind of prompted me to get myself educated. And, you know, basically there was a genocide across America from those early days. So in a sense, maybe the travelers on the Mayflower had their own reasons, and in some senses were needing to get away from their own country, but it resulted in a colonial type genocide.
I think it would make a huge difference if this were part of the curriculum, part of all the history curriculums. I think it would help out our understanding of some of the traumas of the world at the moment. And I really do not understand why it isn't taught. And then I'm asked why I interrupted Yvonne and Andrew. Yvonne and Andrew, did I cut across you? I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, I think he means in the script, but that was just drama.
That's tension. And finally, no, not finally, there's two more. We're going to take these last two now. Emma's asking, I thought many of the crew were also men. All the crew were men as far as we know. The remarkable thing I think about the Mayflower is that they were women and children who landed, and they say, I mean, I don't, you know, but people say, the Wampanoag themselves say that they would have regarded the settlers differently because they had come intergenerationally, and obviously this was a different deal to the traders and fishermen who had brushed up against the shores previously, many of whom had kidnapped Native Americans and taken them back to Europe. The Mayflower pub where I studied theatre at Darting, yes, I know, Dartington, yes. Yes, the Mayflower pub, not in the distance, it's just along the road on the left-hand side, it's still there. It wasn't originally called the Mayflower pub, it was called the Ship, and it was a post office. Are you taught in school about the persecution of the Puritans at that time, prompting them to move to Holland, then to North America? I don't think we are. Michael Daniels, oh, this is one for you, Jane. Did you find any evidence of marriage or romantic union between the early settlers and the indigenous population?
This was my question, and we didn't get round to that, unfortunately. But I know that when they first set eyes on the Wampanoag men, they thought them tall, lusty, and very well built, which I imagine made a pleasant change from the rather seasick, shriveled people that they'd come across with on the boat. So maybe there was a little bit of mutual interest going on.
There was, not necessarily between the first generation that came off the Mayflower, but I think later on we will find there are, and there's also interesting hostage taking and hostages who don't necessarily want to go back again. And then I'm going to take this one as the last one, if you don't mind, which is Ross is asking us, did this group originate in Plymouth, England, or is your group more from the City of London? Is Bubble in London or Plymouth? So was this a community? Keitha, you haven't spoken. Would you like to answer where we are, talk about where we are?
Yes, well, the Bubble Theatre is based in Rotherhithe in southeast London, just right next to the river. And most of us come from the very local area, pretty local to that. But Zoom does open it up. People could join from further afield.
Yeah, I'm not in London anymore. I'm in Berkshire, so yeah.
Well, you'll have to leave. Sorry, people from Berkshire. And then Deborah, the story you told us about Columbus's statue. I'd just like you to share that with everybody. The second part of this question is this a community history project? Because this person is fascinated by our group and feels that it's 400 years in the making, and he's relating it to Trump's counter recently, his attempt to perhaps whitewash or refocus. Talk about a little bit about your experience in America.
Oh, right. Okay. Which example? Are you still talking about when I went to an event in Columbus, Ohio?
Yeah, the one we were talking about statues.
Yeah, okay, yes, yeah, so hello. I lived in America for about 6.5 years. I actually did partake in Thanksgiving dinners while I was there, but didn't really get involved in the history of it. I didn't feel connected in that way, but I enjoyed the social. But there's a time when I was in Columbus, and there was the group, the people I knew, they had a sort of anti-Columbus Day demonstration. So it was Native Americans and like-minded people went to the statue to sort of say their version of being living in America at that time. And they would always send lots of TV cameras and to these local events. And I don't know if I told it in the story, but what was interesting, when I got home in the evening, I was trying to flick through the news to see where it was. And these sort of bits of events only show up for a couple of seconds. And you're thinking it's going to be a big program, they're going to be talking about the issues, but it is really sort of a soundbite. So I think I found it quite easy to not know very much, even though I lived there for quite a long time. And I think from being in this group, I've actually really connected more with the real stories, as Dottie said earlier, that there are people who came on the Mayflower, and those people, I found I was connected to those, whereas I might have perhaps dismissed them as well. And I think history is interesting, but it's not so solid as we tend to be taught, that it's all fixed and this is how it happened. There's all the things you've unearthed, and you start to research, and just by sometimes connecting with other people and hearing their stories and not just shutting down debate. I think we tend to sort of pick a side and then stick to the side, but by being in the group, you're always investigating, you're going forward, you're looking back, you're trying to reassert what you think already, then you hear something else. And I think we always come back to, how does it impact me, and what do I learn from it, and how do I now sort of look at history in its greater form and in its very personal form as well. So I don't know if I've answered the question, but that's my connection to
I think the last point you make, Deborah, about the way in which what it feels like when we're dealing with history within the group, it just feels we're breathing with the story, and we're sort of using lots of different techniques and lots of different sources in order to try and, there is no one history of anything. History is multifaceted, and it changes according to the time that you're looking at it as well, and the lenses through which you're looking at it. We need to close this now. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. The one question we didn't do is that how do we remember the 150 years between the journey and the story? That was the first the question I got, which was from Mayflower Mavericks, and I hope that the script and the performance answer that question. Well, we need to wrap it up now. I'm being told by Keris that I need to thank United St Saviour's, the City of London, Southwark Council, and British Land as well, all of who have put money into the London Bubble to do this extensive piece of research. You'll be pleased to hear that the technology has been so impressive, I forgot to hit the record button at the beginning. So group, next Thursday, we will all have to come back and do it again and record it. I'm sorry. And thank you everybody for attending. Do keep in touch with us through the Bubble website. Good night.